All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm so glad to see you. Thank you for coming, and I'm just tickled pink that I didn't scare everybody off last week, so thank you for showing up. We're going to head into part 2 of this incarnate life, emotion, and others this week, talking a little bit more about our emotional lives as they continue clearly to affect us, but especially in relationship with others, which is a pretty huge part of all of our lives. I'll just begin with a verse, leaning on King James for a verse from Psalm 139 as an opening prayer. I will praise thee, O Lord, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. Amen. So I had heard from lots of good conversation and lots of good feedback from several folks after last week. I did hear that some folks either listened to it online or had trouble seeing the slides. Some of the slides are not quite big enough to see all the details, and there's a lot of words. So if you want to see any of these slides or the presentations in full, I'd be glad to email them your way or figure out a way to get any of this information to you, okay? So just shoot me an email or call me at church and we'll connect. I do want to do a brief review of some of the core content from last week, just because it sort of grounds everything that we're going to talk about today. Some of the prime themes in dealing with our, what I might call challenging or uncomfortable or difficult emotions, what the world or what we might sort of feel like our negative emotions. Often these are things like fear or anger, things like sadness, any of the others, things like envy, all of those challenging emotions that we may feel, that make us feel uncomfortable. And there's sort of several typical reactions. A lot of times we can pretty easily learn to ignore them, to just sort of let them drift on by without acknowledging them, without sort of doing anything to acknowledge that this feeling is going on. I would propose that this leads to emotional distance, both between ourselves and with others. And if I ignore my feelings long enough, I sort of become disconnected, and then things are going on inside me, as I'll get to, and remind us that feelings are actually physical parts of our body. These things are going on that I'm totally disconnected from and have no idea. And then suddenly I'm overcome at some point by a great depth of feeling, and I don't know where it's coming from or why it's there. I don't know if any of you have ever had an experience like that. And we can't choose which emotions we distance ourselves from. It's sort of an all or none proposal, in my understanding. I, at a young age, got very uncomfortable with the emotion of anger for some various reasons in my family and in my experience as a child, and I didn't like anger. Anger felt very dangerous. Anger felt very violent, and so for a long time in my young life, I distanced myself from anger, and eventually it sort of came to experience, and just over the last several years, really, that some people's loved ones even could experience me as somewhat opaque, that they didn't really know what was going on. I was all well and good, but it sort of felt a little surface, a little shallow, and I've come to sort of gradually realize that in distancing myself from one part of my inner life, of my emotional life, it sort of made disconnect for several parts of it. And I'm talking about things with like my relationship with my father, which is a pretty critical thing, right? And we all, maybe relationships with parents are kind of a common theme that many of us have experienced some of the challenge of emotion with. We can also bottle them up, shove them on down, and of course they tend to either, in my experience, curdle and get kind of poisonous, or build pressure until they explode outwards, often at an inappropriate or inopportune time. Or we can engage them. We can sort of begin to listen out, figure out what's going on inside us, and we can then deal with it in an appropriate and healthy way. That doesn't mean just act blindly in a response to our emotion. That doesn't mean that the emotion is always right or correct. It just is. I understand emotions to be neutral. They happen, and then we deal with them. It's what we do in response to our emotion that really counts. But when we have them, if we begin to engage, get curious as to where they're coming from, what they're saying, what they're trying to tell us, and then let that inform us, but then continue to make a decision instead of being like a boat without a sail on waves and being tossed to and fro in sort of the storm of our feelings. I want to make the point, again, this is some of these slides that gets into detail that you can look at if you get more curious later, but that emotions are, at least according to several theories, a psycho-evolutionary theory, they come from our development, our human development. They, at least in this theory, Plutchik's theory, were kind of a feedback response system. They sort of helped prime the pump for actions that benefited survival. Disgust, we eat something that is rotten or poisonous, and our body instinctively reacts to spit it out. Fear, of course, run away from the saber-toothed tiger, as we talked about last week, as Hester mentions in her sermon today. Or anger, to defend ourselves or our family or something of value to us against aggression from the outside. So these things kind of helped us get ready, and that's why they're so reactionary. That's why they sort of occur without really our cognitive acceptance. They just start to happen, and it's our body's way of sensing something and trying to get you ready to respond and prepare you to react. There's sort of a list, and again, different survival issues. The gaining of a valued object, we experience joy, and that encourages us to retain or repeat that thing, and the evolutionary function of that was the encouragement of gaining resources that benefited us. So they're not so surprising when we look at them, and it just kind of makes sense to me as we kind of developed as human beings that these were sort of going on inside us. But like we sort of noted, that emotional system is tuned, it's strung like an instrument, it's tightened to a time when survival, life or death situations were a daily occurrence, where our survival depended on how we reacted, how quickly we responded, and how we responded with. So, we're in a different time. Human development has sort of shot up through the roof. Our sort of the pace of biological evolution has sort of stayed behind. We haven't quite evolved to our sort of current modern day context. And so examples that sort of get in the news, challenging emotions of road rage, for instance, or yelling at an umpire at your kid's Little League game, those probably aren't the same appropriate response that running away from a cave bear was, right? So it's sort of tuned, our emotional systems are kind of tuned to a different time, and so how do we deal with that? Is there a way that we can kind of engage that, interrupt the cycle so that we don't take a swing at someone that we really don't need to be taking a swing at, and that'll probably get us sent to jail, or things like that. But it's hard, right? When you're overcome with emotion, can you remember being a teenager and being dumped? The end of the world. The end of the world. It is the end of the world. When your emotion takes over you, it feels, your whole body is telling you that this message, and so it's hard. It's a hard thing to interrupt. It's a hard thing to sort of break the cycle, to sort of gain a little space from. But it is possible. Now I still have the urge to cuss out and give the bird to someone who cuts me off, but with a breath I can begin to interrupt myself a little bit. Say, like, that's not about you. 2, you just no need to react because you don't want to get shot. Like 3, like let's just. There's no reason. There's simply no reason. I wasn't hurt. I don't have to actually then drive and try and cut the other guy off just to show him that who's he messing with. And so it kind of can happen. But it's hard. As Hester alludes to, as we said, the brain, if it's overwhelmed with stress or anxiety, it tends to kind of revert to some of those core fight or flight kind of responses. It sort of comes back down in my experience and my understanding. And as I've sort of mentioned, that feelings are physical. If once you start to get with a little bit, or if you've just sort of had this experience, you're feeling them in the pit of your stomach, maybe in your heart, maybe in your head, different parts of your body. The urge, again, to swing or kick. These things, they occur inside of you. They are happening inside of you. And they've done kind of body scans of parts of your body that feel activated or deactivated, depending on kind of what might be going on inside of you. Yeah. Very interesting. And that's, that when you're happy, when you're content, you feel that. Do you feel that as a sort of a warmth through your whole body? A lot of people do, and I think people have different experiences, but it sort of activates in kind of kind of almost a whole way for me. So that kind of makes sense to me. All right. We talked a little bit about one possible way to maybe try to interact with your emotions, if that's something you're curious about doing. It's by a priest that I know, and author. He's a psychotherapist and an Episcopal priest. And this is just sort of a simple thing. It's not magic. It's not, any sort of high grade level kind of thing. It's just a little kind of intentional practice that you can try if you find yourself overcome with an emotion, or if you have an emotional pattern that you're trying to investigate or just give some space to. And that's basically SNAP. Stop. Hester is going to give us, if you heard her sermon, is going to give us a wonderful breath prayer, or if you heard it, and really just kind of, that's the thing, is if you can manage the presence of mind, and it's hard, and sometimes you just have to work backwards afterwards, and a lot of times, and I'm still so new at this, but it is really helping my new experience as a married person, of having an argument, or just feeling myself getting defensive for a comment that wasn't intended to be at all, harmful. And if I can make a little breath room, if I can take a space, or if I even have to leave the room for a minute. Now, you have to go back if you're going to stay connected. You can't just walk out. But if you can say, person that I love very much, I just need to step out of the room for a minute, catch my breath, and I'll be right back, and we can continue having this conversation. I can give you the number of times on one hand where I have the presence of mind to actually do that, but baby steps. Notice, just, basic stuff. What's going on inside of me? Why am I feeling that way? Why did my chest or gut suddenly get tight? What's going on? That's kind of the same as ask. Is my response accurate? This person I know who loves me, they made this comment. Do I actually think that they're trying to hurt me or shut me down? You may be in relationships with people where that's true, and that's a whole other case, and that's a whole other story. We'll talk about boundaries in a minute. But that message that my feelings are sort of trying to tell me, is that accurate to the immediate context? And then the pivot, and that's the part, well, what do I do? Do I go back and continue to have this conversation, or do I give into the pattern of I'm going to go up to my room and not talk to this person that I love for a day or two? And what might benefit that relationship more? What might be the healthier or better kind of approach? So again, pretty basic, but just one tool. I'm sure there are several others that might kind of help begin to investigate what's going on inside of us. Like we said, so this is hard. It's really hard. Why bother? And I think just because it can be a healthy aspect of growth as we take care of our physical lives and we try to pursue activity to keep our bodies healthy, as we pursue our spiritual lives to try to keep our relationship to God strong and beneficial, as our emotional life, our inner life is a part of that as well. We can talk about wholeness, we can talk about wellness, we can talk about just growth, but beginning to work a little bit with our and plenty of y'all have plenty of experience with this and life. So I don't mean to talk as if this is an unknown topic to everybody here, but just sometimes it helps to refresh and think again. What if I thought about things this way? Increased emotional awareness strengthens our own emotional and mental health. It's sort of just the everyday. This is the things we're talking about are very basic. They're the everyday. They're the 30 minutes of activity, the 30 minutes of exercise, just to sort of keep at a basic level of kind of health. And as we're going to talk about, it strengthens our connections to other and enlarges our ability to be compassionate with others. As we connect with others, as we open ourselves out, and you know this instinctively just by virtue of your intimate relationships. The more you share, the more you're able to trust and build on that, the deeper you go, and the greater the storms those relationships are able to weather. The more close you feel to someone, the more connected you feel to someone. And that practice even eventually can begin as we hear some challenging readings from Luke in the gospel today. Love thy enemies. That's impossible if we are not able to work on our ability to be compassionate, our ability to empathize and understand what another person might be going through. That doesn't mean, again, we'll get to this again, that doesn't mean you have to okay or sign off on wherever that person is or however that person is behaving or whatever they're doing, but just the ability to say, they must be in a difficult position, or I don't really understand, but maybe I get a sense of why they might be in that particular position or where they're coming from. It begins to build the ability to be compassionate for us. We've gone through a lot of material, so I haven't really concentrated on showing a lot of sources. All of this material comes from the discipline of pastoral theology or of institutional chaplaincy, where chaplains are working in interfaith, multi-denominational situations like hospitals or prisons, but summer camp and school are some places where chaplaincy happens as well. The military, like I said, this stuff we're talking about, it's not Jedi mind tricks, it's not anything super deep, it's just sort of the basics of ways to help our emotional lives and our connections. I threw a lot of scripture at you last weekend, but only briefly and in a very disconnected way, just to show that there is a lot of example in the Bible about where that deals with the topics of emotions and feelings. The New Testament a lot of times leans in guidance and advice for how to approach emotion. Scripture, as you'll see in a theme, Scripture is also very nervous about anger. There's a lot of advice, there's a lot of instruction about not letting the sun go down on your anger, not letting anger tempt you into sin. I especially like this verse from Ephesians. Thane pointed this out to me. Be angry. I thought for sure that must be a misprint, so I went through several translations, but it all says the same thing. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil. So to me, that sounds like the writer of Ephesians is acknowledging that anger is going to happen. I can't just turn that off. I can't shunt that part off. But I can manage how I respond when I'm angry. I think that's what that's getting at. We could talk about that. But we are created in God's image and likeness. Our whole being, our physical selves, our spiritual selves, I think the whole package of the human being is created in God's image and likeness. And so it's a part that we shouldn't ignore, I think. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of how we are in the world. And I think we can learn from it and respond to it. Ecclesiastes and Romans, I think, gives us some marching orders. It recognizes that we're going to be all over the place in this life. Our emotions, our experience of the world is going to be all over the place. And Romans invites the Christian community to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And we'll talk about that in a minute, leaning on pastoral care too. And of course, Philippians, it grounds us. At the end of the day, in these feelings, we can and we should, of course, offer it up to God, to ground ourselves in prayer, to lean into gratitude for the blessings that we're given. If we ground ourselves in gratitude, the other stuff, it still is there. It's not lessened. It doesn't mean we aren't challenged by it, but so much is put in perspective when we are rooted in gratitude for what God has given us and continues to give us, especially in Christ Jesus. So that's some roots. Let's see. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say. Again, so talking a lot about feelings and emotions, but post-fall, out of the Garden of Eden, we are, of course, sinful and broken humans living in a sinful and broken world. So our bodies are a part of that. Our emotions are a part of that. And this is why, again, it's helpful to kind of get to know and manage them, because the ways that they respond, the ways that our bodies may knee-jerk respond might be sinful in many ways. Can lead us into harming others, harming ourselves, and distancing our relationship from God. So that's why we do have to be cautious about them. We do have to investigate, get curious, and figure out how to live with them, because it's just a part of this life, of where we are as broken people, trusting in the baptism and hoping in the life to come. It's sort of all a mix in there. This is from my pastoral care presentation from several weeks ago, and it does sort of, again, continue, I think, moving out of those marching orders in Romans, that we console all of those who are in an affliction because we have been consoled by God, that we bear one another's burdens, and in this way fulfill the law of Christ, which is to love God and to love thy neighbor. And emotional health is really important if you're doing anything that involves caring for others, for being in a relationship with others. So that's sort of some of the why, some of the where. All right. I think there are a couple of basic human needs once we move beyond, food, water, shelter. We have some emotional needs. I hope this should be instinctive, but I think there's a human need to be heard, to know that our perspective, our voice is real, is there. I think to hear that our experience is valid, that yes, I understand that's your experience. Now, again, this doesn't mean that it's necessarily always accurate. This doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best, sort of the best thing. It doesn't mean that it's acceptable to others' experiences, but that is your experience. And I can say that I can affirm that you are having this experience, even if I don't necessarily accept what you're doing with that experience, or even if I don't necessarily think that that's the most accurate reflection of reality. Does that make sense? It's sort of a tricky line, because we try to affirm people and who they are and how they're experiencing the world without necessarily, it doesn't mean we have to just stomp on their experience, but if you're told long enough that your experience isn't valid, that you're not actually experiencing the world in a way that reflects any truth, then that's a diminishing thing. It kind of brings you down, it brings you in, and it leads to, I think, isolation, and just it sort of adds to an inner spiral that is not helpful, that is not healthy. And to feel connected, not isolated. So, and those things can be kind of counterposing, right? If we have an experience and we are worried that we're the only ones who are having this experience, right? I kind of come back to being a teenager. I am the only one who feels this way, and none of you understand me. And that's a little bit proud, right? But it's also, in your inner voice, it's also a little bit scared that you're alone in the world, that nobody knows or can understand you. Because I think most of us in our heart of hearts, I think we need and want to be understood. And so these are sort of the basic things of relating to another person emotionally. All right. Dr. Rannell was a doctor and a counselor that I knew, and he's written some books and has some thoughts on attunement with another. For him, this is especially directed towards the work of healthcare ministry, of trying to connect to someone else who's suffering and in pain. But I think it expands. I think it connects with just connecting to someone in general. Before I do dive into that, I do want to get into. I meant to bring up boundaries with this stuff. So even with our scriptural warrant to connect with others, to weep with those who weep, to rejoice with those who rejoice, even though I think it's a positive thing for us when we connect with someone emotionally, when we're able to be vulnerable, to open ourselves up, I think that's generally a good thing. But like I said, it's a broken world, right? We've all maybe had some negative relationships or unhealthy relationships or relationships with people that weren't necessarily trustworthy with whatever they are. So none of this is to say that you shouldn't have good boundaries, good healthy boundaries in your relationships, that as you get to know someone, right, you build rapport, you build trust, you maybe test a little bit of being vulnerable with them, of sharing your inner self, that you can trust that I can share this less than appealing part of myself, and it won't totally drive you away, or you won't take advantage of that and use it against me somehow. And you build rapport, and you kind of, it's a growth of trust and a growth of relationship. That doesn't mean that you have to go out into the world and bare your heart to someone that you don't know, and just let them take advantage of you or hurt you, right? Does that make sense? So it's this balance. I think it's generally good to be able to connect, to be vulnerable, to show sort of our inner life and true selves. I think that's helpful for us, but we also, because it's the world that we live in, because people are beset by sin, that you have to be a little cautious and careful as well. I don't think that should drive us into isolation or drive us into not connecting. I think that might actually be worse, but there is a little bit of risk involved in connecting with other people. But again, that being said, when we just that boundaries are important in this work and in connection to kind of keep your heart safe as well. We can talk a little bit more about that if you want as we get done. But it's also possible to connect with a stranger or a casual acquaintance, right? We can go through the world of strangers. We may have the best relationships with our loved ones, but if that cashier does not exist to us, that can be kind of a disconnecting and maybe even just a little bit. I think it just coarsens us a little bit as well. If people that we don't know basically don't exist to us, then it's sort of a disconnect. And I think there are healthy ways even to connect with a stranger or to connect with a casual acquaintance with boundaries, with appropriate care, but in a ways that acknowledges, hey, you're a child of God, I'm a child of God, and maybe we can connect in a way, but even if it's not an intimate relationship. All right, so these are sort of some of my understanding of kind of how we kind of can relate to others and maybe connect or not connect, as the case may be. This first one is disconnected. That's sort of what I was talking about. I know you're there. I see you standing over there physically, but we're not connecting at all. I don't know anything that's going on with you. You don't know anything that's going on with me. We might as well be standing between, there might as well be a glass pane or a wall between us in terms of relationship. And it's hard to do anything with that. If I'm interacting with this person and there's no connection, then sort of what's the point, or where do we go, or how do we begin to do anything that we're trying to do, whether we're colleagues, whether we're just strangers out on the bus or what. There's repulsed, which is I kind of have a sense of what's going on with you, and no, it's grossing me out, or I can't deal with that right now. It is whatever you sense that is going on with them, or whatever they share drives you away. And there might be some cases where that's actually a healthy thing, right? There may be again a toxic person in your life, and for all you've maybe tried to help or maybe tried to connect, and it just keeps burning you every time, or they're for whatever reason in a position that is harmful to you or your family, and you may have to break ties. It may repulse you, but in general, is a rough experience. There's dispassionate. This is sort of what I would call maybe the sort of stereotypical sort of doctor's approach of I'm going to kind of, or a scientist's approach. Yes, the subject appears to feel sad today, and sort of taking notes. You're sort of observing, but it's a little bit disconnected. Still, you're maintaining your distance. You're sort of observing, but you're not really letting them affect you. And that's necessary too, right? Again, I say that's a stereotype. Most of the doctors I've known do build connection, especially nurses build connection with their patients. They allow themselves to be affected a little bit. Because that helps them know where you are, that helps them care for us, that helps them better be able to interact with us. So it's sort of a stereotype, but also sometimes a little bit necessary. In plenty of jobs, interacting with people, especially with people who are in hard situations, sometimes you have to be dispassionate to be able to do your job, or to be able to help them, maybe even though that's a difficult emotional connection. Does that make sense? Sympathetic. Sympathy, it's traditionally a good thing. You send cards of sympathy. You are feeling something for someone, whether they're in a difficult situation. We think of times of grief and bereavement. And so that can be a good thing. There's just the tricky part is in sort of the picture, it's coming from above. It's not, again, an interaction. It's you having a feeling and generally assuming that it will make sense to the person that you're sort of offering it to. I feel bad for you. You must feel so bad. It sort of is still a relationship that's a little bit above, that's a little bit out. And sometimes, I don't know if you've ever received an attempt at sympathy that has just gone the wrong way, or the words didn't connect, or you were actually feeling something totally opposite of what that person sort of assumed you were feeling, right? Sometimes we have lots of different feelings and responses to the challenges in our life. So the person that is being offered sympathy, it might sometimes not land, and that's why that can be a kind of tricky thing. And then empathy. A lot of people talk about empathy as a feeling. It's not really a feeling. It's a connection it's an interaction of relationship. It's this shared experience. It's using our imagination and our own experience to be able to try to understand a little bit where that person's coming from, and then help them know that you are experiencing, or possibly experiencing, a little bit The reason that this differs from sympathy is that ideally you're in a good or enough relationship. Some people are naturally gifted. Some people are very empathic, sort of naturally, and that, that's an interesting thing too. But for those of us who maybe not necessarily empathic, if I'm visiting with someone, I have to talk to them. I have to be in a relationship. I have to ask helpful questions. I have to listen. I have to come up close to them, and I have to let their experience affect me. I have to know that they're feeling sad. That has to remind me of my own experiences of sadness, and then I have to communicate back, whether that's verbal or nonverbal, that I'm with you. I'm here. I hear you that you're feeling really crummy and down right now. I've had experiences like that as well. I can't imagine what you're going through right now, but I'm here and I'm listening. So you can tell me if you want more about that to help you know where you're coming from. So it's a little bit of this merge, right? It's a little bit of coming together, and that's so critical for people who are in helping professions or people who just want to be close, because empathy fosters intimacy. To know that you're known, right? One of those human needs, to know that you're understood, to not feel so alone, to not feel isolated. It's a critical aspect. Then, of course, as with everything, you can't overdo it. To be totally merged with someone, you might think of a codependent relationship. You might think of totally enmeshed families where the experience of one person is the experience of everyone. The experience of if one thing happens, then it affects the whole family system, the whole group. And that, I would say, people in those systems do feel especially close. But if you're not we use that word self-differentiated, which means you kind of know your own self and it's distinct, and you can have feelings, but they don't totally capture you. They don't totally sweep you away in the depth of that feeling, of that passion. And it can be a challenge to be your own individual self if you're totally merged with someone as well. So let's see. Yeah, that's a pretty basic thing. Does anybody have any thoughts or response or questions about this part of it?
The relationship between a mother and her child early in the child's life is a merged relationship to me, or parents now, because when I was raising children, the father was not the key person to take care of the child.
That certainly sounds reasonable to me, and makes sense. And that's not an unhealthy thing, right? The child is what has to be for caretaking. So that's why I try to speak really cautiously, not having absolutes about any of these. They're just different aspects of our experience and relating, and some can be healthy and occur in the right context, and some can be unhealthy and occur in different contexts, but they're all sort of, I think we could probably maybe find examples of both, when this is sort of the right stance and place to be, and when maybe it's a less helpful one. Any other thoughts, responses?
Sometimes you have different relations with different children of your own, and your grandchildren too. You don't have, sometimes one of them can be doing something that you need to really relate to, and you don't just not relate to the others, but it changes somewhat. But also, when you get to a certain vintage, as I am, you don't have the emotional energy to get angry like you used to. Anger takes too much emotional energy. You need to be positive. I'm not Pollyanna, don't misunderstand, but you just need to reach out and connect with others and listen sometimes instead of talking all the time.
And that makes a lot of sense to me, especially, again, as a person who tends to shy away from anger. But anger also can be kind of, it gives you the spit and fire to do what needs to be done at other times, right? It's about how you direct it and how you utilize it. But certainly, that sounds really appealing, to sort of be able to just breeze on by some of the more challenging things that are frustrating. Anybody else? So this is another slide from last week, sort of feelings as messengers. This is from a pastoral theologian named William Condrath. And yeah, again, it's just a way to sort of begin to try to understand what's going on either with yourself or with someone else. The idea being that if emotion is our sort of feedback system, then there are ways to maybe begin to tell, well, what's going on? Why am I feeling this way? What am I reacting to? And it's tricky, right? How often are you maybe in a fight with a loved one, or someone blows up, again, with the umpire or road rage? Is the thing ever the thing? I find that the thing is often not the thing, that the thing that I am mad about is a little bit of a cover, and maybe I was actually hurt in some way, and so I'm sort of pissed off, but I don't know where to direct it. I'm mad that I let myself be hurt, so now I really don't like the way that you parked the car this morning, and so I'm going to pick a fight with you about that. Or it's, how many times do dirty dishes piling up open up a conversation about some deeper aspect of what might be going on? So it can take some sussing out. But again, I think there is some. It can be a little bit subjective. But there are some ways that again we kind of are usually reacting for a reason. I kind of think of us as emotional. We have sort of emotional fields, almost like a magnetic field. And I think that can help us attend to ourselves and attend to others, but it also complicates things, right? I think when we're sort of connected, and this is a bit of empathy too, and sometimes it's not even sought after, but sort of group feeling, group emotion, how you can be swayed by the way someone else is feeling, and you kind of begin to pick up that a little bit. You can think of it in scary ways, like mobs forming, but there's also things like communal grieving. You might not feel sad going into the funeral, but as people start to cry, that might begin to just bleed into you a little bit. And I don't think that's a good or a bad thing. I just think we're still a little bit herd animals. We have these emotional fields, and when they come together, they kind of bounce off and play and influence with each other. So it's just, it's useful, I think, to try to figure out, well, why is that happening? What's going on with me? What's going on with you? Where's all that coming from? Yeah. And it helps us care for people. It helps me, again, I keep using the anger example, but that's pretty much one of my main things is if someone's angry at me, my tendency is to, again, bow out, shut down, give in. If I can have the presence of mind, if I can snap, if I can give myself a breathe, say, Jonathan, you're okay, you're not in danger. This person, your wife isn't going to divorce you because you didn't do the dishes last night, hopefully. I'm checking in with reality, right? And even though I feel, any conflict to me feels like the end of the world, pretty much. It's a challenge. But if I can figure out, well, actually, what is she? Is there something behind that anger? If I can get curious, that's always the helpful thing for me to remember. If I can get curious about why this person feels angry or why this person is scared, then I can begin to ask the question. I can begin to learn a little bit more. Well, we've both been busy at work, and we haven't really had the time to connect. We feel a little distanced from each other, and it feels like I'm not given priority to this relationship. And maybe that's where some of that anger is coming from, a violation of boundaries, of the vows that we will prioritize each other because we're in that loving relationship. And if that's feeling like a boundary that's been violated, then I can attend to that. I can say, I'm sorry I didn't do the dishes, but also, hey, let's clear out Friday night and make sure that that's our time together. I'm really sorry. Actually asking questions is always good. Why are you mad? What's wrong? What else is going on? Are you upset with me? Or, and just figuring out, drilling down a little bit. Basic stuff, relating 101, but it's, to me, I don't know, maybe everybody else is a pro at it, but to me it's really hard. It's a really challenge, and I get so easily distracted by myself and in my interior that it's easy to sort of lose sight of. All right, I feelings will. We can talk about that. Yeah, but again, where sort of last week's, where sort of being aware of ourselves is so critical, because we can't relate to others if we can't relate to ourselves, if we're not really, it's really hard, or it's just like mysterious things exploding and emotionally. But dealing with someone else, being in relationship, it can affect us. This is where I talked a little bit about old emotional tapes or old emotional messages, things that we learn as a child or things that we experience as a child that sort of build into a pattern. And it can kind of hit us in tender ways. Someone might do something that's just a little whatever, again, just a habit or a habitual sort of thing. I just don't like the way they do that. I don't like the way they stand there. And I wonder if that's scratching a button, if that's poking a button that is calling back some of those experiences. Let's see. I talked a little bit last week. When I was early on in my chaplaincy at the hospital, I struggled to go into if I was doing some of my basic rounding, to knock on someone's hospital room and insert myself into their situation. I felt like it felt rude. It felt like I wouldn't want someone just to walk into my door and bother me. It felt, who am I to kind of come and ask people how they're doing when they're in the hospital? Of course, something's not going on that's super great. As I begin to suss that out a little bit, I wasn't sure of my authority. I was an employed hospital worker with all the privileges and responsibilities of a nurse or a doctor or a social worker, just in my own context in different ways, and I had to grapple with that. It's my job. It's my job. It's literally my job to come into someone's hospital room and check in on how they're doing. I'm part of their care. And if they don't want to talk to me, that's fine. I'll leave. No problem. So that was one thing. And one of the stories early on is I came into an emergency room, and there was a big family there, a Hispanic family, and no one really spoke English, and I don't speak Spanish. So I tried to sort of show what I was there for. I think I have since forgot it, but had kind of learned the word for. One of my colleagues is Mexican American, and he sort of said, chaplain doesn't really translate very well. So I'd learned the word for pastor and prayer, and tried to kind of communicate that I was there for them, but just sort of got blank looks, not really understanding. And my sort of old, some middle school feelings came up. I felt awkward. I felt embarrassed. I felt like I was just kind of really having a negative impact. And so I got out of there and said, "Oh, sorry," and pretty much left as soon as I could manage. And I, again, when I reflected on it later, was able to call back. Well, doesn't matter that I was feeling uncomfortable. Am I worried about what these folks think of me? If I had been able to deal with that, to breathe and step into it, maybe I could have employed the language line, which is a resource that I had, and that I knew I had, but I just couldn't bear to even feel that awkward and embarrassed anymore. Maybe I could have grabbed one of the nurses, because there are plenty of nurses that speak Spanish, and so I lost an opportunity to care for these folks in the best possible way that I could, because I felt uncomfortable, because I have had feelings of discomfort and awkwardness before, and sort of that old tape playing of just get out of there, leave, and that's the best response, when that was sort of a little bit of a loss of my opportunity and a little bit of dereliction of my responsibility. There were other times, plenty of times, where a patient was having just a really uncomfortable experience. If things involve bowels, it can often be, it's hard to sometimes stay in the room, and I felt embarrassed for the patient, embarrassed for myself, awkward to be asking what was going on when it was clearly very personal and sort of a very uncomfortable situation. And there were a couple occasions where I left earlier than I wish I had, where pastoral interaction, where pastoral support could have occurred in a better way. I could have given more support and care if I had just been able to get over my own feelings of discomfort and stick around a little bit more. Anger, I think a lot of old tapes come of, again, of where the thing is not the thing. And so, yeah, it's helpful to, again, begin to kind of get a picture of what pushes our buttons, because then you can you can determine, well, I really should be angry at this situation, or to let it go and continue to interact in that relationship in a way that furthers whatever your goals or whatever your relationship is. This is a slide from another presentation about compassion fatigue and self-care in hospital settings, but I think it works just for our general human interactions at all. It says, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. And I would say we could move the word suffering and loss and just say emotions, just say feelings. That these are just a part of our daily lives, and if we think it's I guess by that I'm just trying to normalize the experience of human emotions of ups and downs, and that's not, there's nothing wrong with that in a basic way. That if we as we come to sort of have our roller coaster, it's just to normalize that, and that there are ways again that we can deal with that, but that it's not necessarily a sign that things are wrong to have feelings. Sometimes we act like that's a defect, to be affected by life, to be affected by relationships. When, right, emotions are the color to our life. Emotions are how we know and experience. They're what shapes our ups and downs. Even the challenging ones give color to our world, to our experience. And of course, especially heightened joy and gladness and contentment and peace and love, which I think, we really only know in the face of some of the more challenging ones. I'm going to skip that, self-care. We can get back to that later. But and also, so all of that to sort of sum is, as we begin to get more aware, I think there are things that we can do, even the negative feeling ones, even the feelings that we wish we didn't have. We can take those and we can sort of judo chop them into, really sort of roll with it. They can become that energy. My being angry at something can become energy to reconnect instead of energy to make myself run away. For those examples where I had trouble with feeling uncomfortable in the hospital room, if I had instead sat with that, taken it, and said, if I'm feeling this, I wonder what this person is feeling like. I wonder what this person is feeling like having strangers walk in and out of their room and they have to explain their story and explain this really uncomfortable, hurtful, just really terrible situation that they're in over and over again. And I wonder if they would like someone who is able to just sit with them and be with them without necessarily having to talk it out, who doesn't react in a way that makes them feel unwanted or unloved or especially isolated. We can take that energy and move forward. So I think, again, that's why it can be so critical to kind of be able to take a breath, to take a step away from whatever feeling we might be having and allow it to sort of energize us to move into a more, we might say, a more Christ-like stance of a reaction with someone. We'll do a little table talk to cap things off. I think. I know there were some great conversations last week. If you feel comfortable, don't have to, but if you feel comfortable, here are some questions to share with each other. Has someone's emotional reaction ever taken you completely by surprise? If you ever figured out what was really going on, were you then able to relate? How has someone's attempt to connect with you in an emotional time been helpful or less helpful in kind of carrying on through it? And can you tell a story of a time when someone's ability to empathize, to see you, to hear you, to know kind of a little bit of what you were going through and sharing it a little bit, has that made a difference for you? And we'll just take a few minutes. We're coming up on the end of the time, so we'll do this, and then I'll just say one word and then take us away into worship. So go ahead. Hey, everyone. Sorry, I hate to interrupt. I do. I have to go get ready to lead worship. Yep. I do just want to interrupt for a second to say thank you for coming today. I hope it's been interesting or insightful or aggravating or that it made you feel something. If you want to talk more or argue with me or give some feedback or responses, would love that. Give me a call or an email or come find me somewhere. Do just want to say, this is all basic. This is all sort of, I don't know, not basic or lower, but just this is sort of day-to-day stuff. I do want to lift up and support our professionals who are professionally trained counselors and therapists. If we are wrestling with something really painful and really serious and really deep, it's good to talk to people. It's good, and we have people who are trained and clinically professional and able to help walk you through deeper stuff. So if there is an issue or something occurs in your life or something that is called up or you need to investigate, I think literally every human being alive probably should talk to a therapist at some point for some reason, probably regularly, because life is hard. It just is. It's hard, and there are challenges, and we're hurt in ways that I think we don't realize, and just that are a part of walking through this life. And it's a good thing to be able to know that someone can see you and hear you and know a little bit of what you're going through, and maybe can help walk you through it a little bit. So again, this is all just kind of relating 101 as I have understood it, but I hope, don't let that be the end. And I hope it helps you love yourself and love other people better. And if there are things that come up, again, we clergy are always a good person to talk to, who can then refer you to professionals as well. So keep that in mind if that's something that has been called up at all for you in thinking about the ways that we've experienced the world. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in worship.